Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Here to wish you a very happy Morrissey Monday, a celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. Now, I do realize it has been a while since I posted one of these. You're welcome, by the way. It has nothing to do with any sort of lack of heat or fire or passion when it comes to my Morrissey / Smiths fandom. To be perfectly honest with you, in the spirit of transparency, I'm sort of sitting a little bit on the fence right now in terms of the future of this channel. It has become undeniably obvious to me that nobody asked for this. People are generally not very interested, not watching, and I'm not very good at it. Even my own wife, I asked her, hey, did you see that video I put up the other day? What'd you think? I don't watch this shit. It's like, awesome. Thanks. So, as of right now, I'm fighting the urge to just cancel the whole thing, delete all the videos, and burn it to the ground, which is sort of my nature. We'll see where it goes moving forward from here. At least as of today, we are on the air. So I thought I'd jump back up on here and for this week's episode, just sort of touch base on some of the more newsworthy happenings in the Morrissey / Smiths world over the past month or so since I threw up a Morrissey Monday. Today is May 20th, 2024, and of course the first thing you have to mention, yesterday being May 19th, marked the one-year anniversary of the passing of Smiths bassist Andy Rourke, who died on May 19th, 2023 of pancreatic cancer at the age of 59. Now, if you saw any of the photographs that were posted of Andy Rourke not long before his passing, I think it would be safe to describe his death as, yes, incredibly sad, but not entirely shocking. I think it was Johnny Marr who posted a picture of Andy Rourke not long before he passed away that I saw on Instagram or one of the social media outlets. And I was quite stunned by his appearance. He definitely did not look healthy. I remember thinking to myself, not knowing what was wrong with him, not knowing what his diagnosis was, thinking that he looked incredibly unhealthy and hoping for the best. It wasn't long after that, unfortunately, that he passed away. Andy Rourke, of course, best known as being the bassist of the Smiths and one half of what I think is the greatest and most underrated rhythm section in the history of rock and roll. When Andy Rourke passed away a year ago, it also extinguished any hope, at least in my opinion, what very little minuscule hope there ever was of a Smiths reunion. Now, I am not one of those Smiths fans who's necessarily sat around pining for any sort of a reunion regarding the band. In fact, and I've pretty much been resigned to the fact that this was probably never going to happen. I don't think that the members of the band could ever really make it happen in terms of the social interaction, especially when it comes to the relationship between Morrissey Marr and Mike Joyce. And when Andy Rourke passed away, there was such a huge outpouring of love and affection from all of the music community, but especially his three surviving band members within the Smiths. I always thought that after the demise of the Smiths, I always considered Andy Rourke to be sort of the best ambassador for the band, because Andy Rourke was one of those guys who just never said anything negative about the band or any of its members, whereas all of the other three guys in the band have at times been known to sort of throw shade at the band and each other. And of course, the biggest culprit in all of this is Mr. Stephen Patrick Morrissey, as much as it pains me to say. But when Andy Rourke passed away, of course, I think it killed any legitimate hope or opportunity for the Smiths to ever reunite. In my opinion, the Smiths were only four guys. It could only be the four guys and the original four guys. And without Andy Rourke, those days sadly have come and gone. Not that it was necessarily ever going to happen again, but Andy Rourke is my favorite bassist of all time. In my opinion, the Smiths are the greatest band in the history of rock and roll, and he and Mike Joyce together created what I think is the best and most underrated, and certainly my favorite rhythm section of all time. I think the Smiths are one of those bands that each member, all four members, are equally integral to the sound of the Smiths. Now, sometimes people will dismiss, not so much Andy Rourke. I never really hear people totally dismiss Andy Rourke, but I do hear sometimes people dismiss Mike Joyce, and it's something that I find to be very irritating. A lot of people say, anybody could do what Mike Joyce did. Mike Joyce wasn't necessarily the most dynamic or complicated drummer in the world, but I think what he did was as big a part of the Smiths sound as Morrissey or Marr or Andy Rourke, for that matter. And I'm somebody, personally, when it comes to music, especially when it comes to drumming, I am somebody who I prefer clean lines. I like a nice, simple, clean backbeat. As far as I'm concerned, you can have all of these drummers that are sort of more technically proficient, if you will. You can have Neil Peart, you can have Mike Portnoy, you can have all of these people who may be more sort of, technically proficient than Mike Joyce, people who do all of this sort of, the bells and whistles and all of this sort of unnecessary complication that isn't necessarily stuff that is my luggage anyway. It was a sad day a year ago when Andy Rourke passed away. I don't know how I got on the tangent about Mike Joyce and his undeniable contribution to the band. Now, at a certain point in time, it's a fantasy of mine that Johnny Marr and Morrissey will at some point bury the hatchet. Not even enough to so much go out and play shows, but just enough to sort of be within the same room with each other and celebrate their career and their legacy together. But if they ever did get to a point to where they could actually go out and play shows, even if Mike Joyce happened to join in, which I don't think he would, I don't think because of the passing of Andy Rourke and the name The Smiths can really only be used when it comes to those four people. They'd still have to come up with some sort of a different name. If Morrissey and Marr were able to tour under the name Morrissey and Marr, I think that would be pretty snug. You would definitely see my lumber right up there alongside of the Northern Lights. Basically, you could just take all of my money if you wanted. Sadly, I never got a chance to see the Smiths. I was only 12 years old when the band split up. So it's just something that I guess is never going to be in the cards. For me, I am envious and jealous of people that got a chance to see the Smiths back in the day. I'm not going to lie to you. But anyway, rest in peace, Andy Rourke. It was a sad day a year ago. I can't believe it's already been a year. I know that's sort of the most cliche thing you could ever say when it comes to how fast time passes. But we do miss you, and all Morrissey and Smiths fans all over the world love you and will always celebrate your musical legacy. As I just mentioned, today is May 20th, 2024, which means we are only 2 days away from May 22nd, which marks the 65th birthday of the big guy, Mr. Stephen Patrick Morrissey. So allow me to be the first to wish you a happy 65th birthday, as you are now reaching what was at one time at least traditional retirement age. Not that Morrissey is near retirement, or at least I hope he isn't near retirement, but I have to say, every year around Morrissey's birthday, I have to express how grateful I am for both him and his music. It's hard to imagine where I might be in this life if it wasn't for the music of Morrissey, somebody that I became a fan of 30 years ago this year. Actually, right around this time, 1994, I first got turned on to Morrissey for myself on a class field trip when one of my schoolmates loaned me a copy of Morrissey's CD, Bone to Drag. Now, at the time, I was a little bit sort of lukewarm on the idea of Morrissey. I knew who Morrissey was, and I knew who the Smiths were, but at the time, I had this sort of preconceived, idea that I just wasn't a Morrissey fan. I just didn't like him. And I remember this classmate offered me the CD. He and I had met the day before, and he and I were the two kids in this class. It was my government class, and we were going down to Sacramento to sit in on a session of the state assembly and meet our local assemblyman, who was a guy by the name of Bernie Richter at the time. I don't know why I remember that, but I do remember that we had lunch with Bernie Richter, who was kind of an asshole, to be honest with you. But this classmate and I, we decided we were the two kids in that class who wore band shirts. It's like, hey, you bring some CDs, I'll bring some CDs. We'll kind of trade out. And I remember he offered me Bone of Drag to listen to, and I was like, I'm good. I don't really want to listen to that. And I was like, I don't really like Morrissey. And he sort of looked at me with the side eye, and he's like, why? And I remember I sort of drew a blank. I couldn't come up with any sort of reason as to why I didn't like Morrissey. I just had this sort of preconceived idea in my head that I didn't like Morrissey and the Smiths. Maybe it was because of the kids in my high school that wore the Morrissey and the Smiths shirts. Kids that I wasn't particularly a very big fan of. Kids that didn't have a lot of use for me, and I didn't have a lot of use for them in return. So I was like, fine, all right. I sort of begrudgingly snatched it away, and almost immediately Bone of Drag completely blew my mind. I probably listened to that CD 4 or 5 times that day on the drive between my hometown and Sacramento and back. And I remember that night when I got home from school, literally walking around my house, laying in my bed, sitting in my bedroom, thinking about that album, thinking about the songs, and immediately on my next soonest convenience, I went out and bought a copy of it for myself, a CD that I probably have worn out probably 3 or 4 copies of in my lifetime. Still my favorite album of all time. Now, I realize that some people will say it loses album status based on being a compilation. I don't happen to agree with that. In fact, if you think I'm wrong, I suggest that you lick my ass. Bone of Drag is and will always be my favorite album of all time. And of all the artists that I listen to, which is hundreds, possibly thousands of artists that I listen to on the regular, if you're somebody who pays attention to this channel, which based on the numbers you aren't, you realize that. But there's just something about Morrissey and the Smiths. There's something about him and his music and his lyrics and his voice that connect with me, on a level that no other artist has ever connected with me. There's something in what he says and the way he looks at the world and the way he delivers the words that he uses and the language he uses that I relate to on a level that I've never related to with any other artist. Sometimes I find it hard to actually articulate because I'm not a very smart person, for one, but I find it very hard sometimes to articulate to people my feelings towards the music of Morrissey and the Smiths. And there are other artists that I love. There are bands that are in my top 3, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 artists of all time. But even between Morrissey and the Smiths, who are my favorite artists of all time, and David Bowie, who I would make the suggestion is probably my second favorite artist of all time, there's a huge line of demarcation between even Morrissey and David Bowie. And I've had people ask me in the past, are you saying that Morrissey's better than David Bowie? Yes, I am. There's just something about him that, I just relate to on a level that, I just don't with any other artist. And I don't say this to be melodramatic, as much as Morrissey can be melodramatic. I don't say this to be melodramatic, but I don't doubt that Morrissey has saved my life at least once or twice. And you think about just some of the shit, basically, that his music has gotten me through. I am eternally grateful for him and his music. And I most sincerely wish him the happiest of birthdays. And if I am in any way typical of the Morrissey fan or Smiths fan, it makes it, it makes this whole campaign over the past several years, which I think has sort of died out now, the campaign to cancel Morrissey. It proves that it was always going to be an exercise in futility, because Morrissey and most of his fans, I would make the argument, are people that don't necessarily have a high enough opinion of humanity to be peer pressured into deprogramming based on the opinions of others. And like I said, at least in my experience, there isn't an artist out there that I relate to on this level whose lyrics mean as much to me and touch me in the way that his do. And if I am a typical Morrissey fan in that sense, it's just an impossibility that you're ever going to sort of rid the planet of this guy. I mean, he is the ultimate rock and roll cockroach. Fortunately, it seems as if, at least in my observations, it seems as if, this whole cancel culture thing is finally dying out. Thank God it is. I'm so happy that the genderless blobs did not win that war. However, you still see the comments, especially whenever there's a story about Morrissey online or any sort of stupid social media outlet. You still see the comments by the sheep who want to accuse Morrissey of being some sort of an extremist. People use the word Nazi or fascist, which only tells me that those people should invest in a history book. I am somebody now, I am not necessarily an artist when it comes to using the English language, as you can probably tell if you've watched any of these videos. But I am a huge fan of the English language, and I take it personally when I hear the language being raped and molested. And when you misuse words like Nazi and fascist and socialist and all of these words that simple-minded morons use to describe people that they don't agree with, I sort of take it personally. And I can only imagine what it must have been like for my two grandfathers, who were both around during World War II, when they hear idiots throw around words like Nazi or socialist. But, every time I read a story about Morrissey online, and if there's a comment section, I should just steer away, which I struggle with because I am protective of Morrissey. I like to hear what people say. You can't help but see those sort of comments about Morrissey being a fascist, being a Nazi, and all of this stupid shit that just keeps getting repeated over and over. In fact, the other day, my wife and I were at a store here in Nashville. Actually, it's a store that's really close to our house. It's called McKay, and if you haven't been to, or if you ever come to Nashville, you should check out McKay if you're a fan of books, CDs, records, DVDs. It's like this super mega store. It's awesome. My wife and I spend way too much time and money there. But the other day, I was there flipping through the records, and I was wearing one of my Morrissey shirts, which I've sort of learned over time. If you wear a Morrissey shirt out in public, even in a place like Nashville, you're going to catch some grief for it once in a while. And I was flipping through some records, and this guy walked past me, behind me. I couldn't even see who he was. And all I hear is this guy say, Morrissey's a Nazi. So I stop what I'm doing. I turn around in order to engage this gentleman and have a conversation and sort of chop it up, when I noticed that he hadn't even sort of stopped. He had done basically the in-person equivalent to leaving somebody a shitty comment on social media from their mom's basement. He did the drive-by, Morrissey's a Nazi, and kept walking. And I thought to myself, all right, man, if you want to actually have a conversation about this and discuss our differing opinions, that's fine. But don't be some squirrely little worm and do the sort of cowardice drive-by on somebody you've never met, on somebody that you would really never have the balls to have a conversation with face-to-face. And I'm not saying that as if I'm some big scary dude. But all the people who leave shitty comments on social media platforms about Morrissey, or do things like the drive-by crappy comment in a record store, they're basically just sweaty twats as far as I'm concerned. And I'm sick to death of the fact that cowardice is a virtue that people value so much in what passes as our modern day society. I literally wanted to like chase the guy down, honestly. Be like, honestly, if you want to have a conversation, man, let's talk. But you don't know shit. You're just regurgitating something that you read on somebody else's comment on social media. Anyway, enough of that. I love you, Morrissey. All fans around the world love you. Happy birthday. Happy 65th birthday. I hope it is the best one ever. And now you're officially at retirement age, which makes me feel old, that all of my heroes are now reaching their mid-60s. My best friend Tim out in California reminded me of a quote this week by Robert Smith. I think he attributed it to Robert Smith. It's a quote I've heard, but I don't remember the exact source. I think it's Robert Smith, but he said that all my gods are gray. And unfortunately, when you're my age, your mid-40s, that's true, sadly. Anyway, happy 65th birthday, Morrissey. Love you, man. I'm so grateful for you and your music, and I don't say this just to be dramatic. I really don't know where I would be without it having been in my life for the last 30 years. So far, 2024 has been a relatively quiet year for Morrissey, at least ever since he canceled the Year of the Quarry anniversary shows out in Southern California. That being said, in April, the end of April, around April 21st, it was announced finally that Morrissey had successfully purchased back the rights to his as of yet unreleased record, Bonfire of Teenagers. Now, of course, this is a huge melodrama that dates back to 2021 when the album was recorded. Morrissey, of course, has famously boasted that this is his greatest work, that this is his Abbey Road, if you will. At this point in time, it's hard to imagine that Morrissey is capable of putting out a record that is on par with some of the greatest records within his own catalog. When you've been around as long as Morrissey has, and you've put out just that level of quality, you're sort of working against yourself in that sense. Of course, Morrissey released the first single off the new record not too long ago. Well, I guess it's been a long time ago now, Rebels Without Applause, which I think is just incredible. It's a song that I still listen to this day on extremely heavy rotation. And if the new record, Bonfire of Teenagers, if that is representative of what this new record is going to sound like, I'm all in, son. But really, if it's even as good as I'm Not a Dog on a Chain, which I actually think is a great record for the most part. It's got a couple of pieces of clunkage on it, at least in my opinion, but 40 years into your career, every record you put out is going to have a couple pieces of clunkage. Now, I'm not sure, what this exactly means in terms of Bonfire of Teenagers. There has been no real update in terms of any sort of even tentative release date or any interest from any other sort of record companies. Now, of course, Morrissey is still sort of taking jabs at Capitol Records, which is sort of understandable. Morrissey described this whole process with Capitol Records as being a bloody battle that most wouldn't have survived. Again, Morrissey has a talent for being melodramatic. I would make the argument that, yes, this was probably an extremely frustrating ordeal. And when you are somebody like Morrissey who puts your entire heart and soul into your work, it probably is frustrating. I know specifically he, went after Capitol Records in, based on their support of Sam Smith, an artist that Morrissey is not a big fan of, nor am I, nor should anybody be really. So I understand the frustration of this. I'm sure that purchasing the rights to this record back was something that was financially, uncomfortable. Morrissey is one of those guys that has more money than God, more money than he could probably ever spend in 3 lifetimes. So in that sense, I don't necessarily feel, sorry for the guy. But what I'm hoping to hear in the next few months, or at least hopefully by the end of summer, is at least some sort of tentative release date, because I am on pins and needles. Now, I'm usually pretty patient when it comes to these new records. I'm not one of those people who acts as if it's the end of the world. The new record will eventually come out. I know it'll eventually come out. Maybe this year, maybe next year, maybe the year after. We have a lot of music to go back and listen to until that day comes. But like I said, with the new single, Rebels Without Applause, which just absolutely tore my head off. I think I'm pretty optimistic about what this record might sound like. I've also gone on YouTube and I've listened to some of the songs that he has sort of brought out on the road with him. Now, when he was out here in Memphis and Nashville in last year for the 40th anniversary tour, he did not play Rebels Without Applause live on the set list, which, I wish he would have. I love that song. The song he played was, of course, The Telephone Rings, and gotta be honest with you, I didn't necessarily love that song. Now, I've never heard a studio version of it, but to me, that song was semi-forgettable, if I'm being honest with you, Steve. So hopefully we will have some sort of news. I hope by the end of summer, honestly. At least like a release date. Maybe get it out by the end of the year, if you don't mind. I'd greatly appreciate it. As part of the deal when he bought back the rights to his unreleased record, Bonfire Teenagers, Morrissey was also successful in repurchasing or reacquiring, I guess, the rights to his album, World Peace Is None of Your Business, which is 10 years old this year. And again, I just mentioned this about Andy Rourke passing away a year ago. I cannot even wrap my brain around the fact that this record is 10 years old, because this literally seems like it was yesterday. And I'm sort of curious to see, because this record is conspicuously absent off of all of the sort of music streaming platforms, Spotify and Apple Music, and I've never really understood why. I'm sure the reason's out there. I just have to dig for it. But I'm curious to see, now that Morrissey has the rights to this record back, two things. One, will it be reposted back up on the music streaming sites, which I think would be pretty snug. I'm not going to lie to you. I'd like to listen to this album in my car once in a while, instead of always having to put on the CD, which is, it's not a big inconvenience. But, there are times I'm driving around in my little lesbian station wagon, and I'd like to hear World Peace Is None of Your Business. I also wonder if there's going to be any sort of a reissue, a 10-year anniversary, especially a vinyl reissue, because I don't happen to have this record on vinyl, I'm sad to say. So I have like 3 or 4 different CD copies of it, but I don't have it on vinyl. So some sort of a 10-year anniversary re-release would be pretty snug. I also wonder if Morrissey has any sort of plans in terms of celebrating this record's 10-year anniversary, because if you go back and you watch the very first video in the history of this channel, which I don't recommend you watch any of this crap, I ranked Morrissey's albums, and I compared them to where Morrissey ranked his own catalog in an interview he did with the NME. And in Morrissey's ranking, when he ranked his catalog on the NME, he personally had this album as his number 1 in his catalog. Now for me, it's not quite there, son. If you're telling me that this record is better than Queen is Dead, or Meat is Murder, or Strange Ways, or Quarry, or Bone Drag, not buying it, son. But that was his stance. That was the hill apparently he was willing to die on. I don't agree with that. I like this record. Actually, I did an episode about this record not that long ago. I decided, having listened to it for a whole week straight, that I actually liked it a lot more than I initially thought I did. Because for a long time, this record first came out, it didn't do anything for me. And I listened to it a few times, and I kind of shelved it. And I'd bring it back out, and I'd try to listen to it again, and it wouldn't really stick to me, and I'd shelve it. And a while back, I did a video talking about this record, and I kind of got it more. This is a record that is sort of beginning to, finally 10 years into its life, finally beginning to sort of stick to me. I've talked about on the past how when I first got Kill Uncle way back, back in the mid-90s, that was a record that took a long time to stick to me too. Kill Uncle was not a record that just immediately latched onto me. It was an album that it took time. It took a couple years for that record to really grab me. So this one has begun to sort of grab me more. It's still not my favorite. One thing I love about this record, though, I think the strength of this record is its diversity in terms of musical style. And a lot of the Spanish influence. I like it. So I'm curious to see three things when it comes to him reacquiring the rights to World Peace. One, will it end up back on Spotify and Apple Music and all that, just so I can listen to it in my car, please, Steve. Two, some sort of vinyl reissue. Thank you very much. And three, is there going to be any sort of special thing? Maybe a few shows? I don't know. He hasn't really announced much as far as live music for 2024, at least that I've seen. Another big thing that just came out around the same time was that in July 26th to be exact, Morrissey is reissuing one of my favorite, this might be my favorite live Morrissey record of all time. That's a tough one because I love all of the live records for different reasons, but Beethoven Was Deaf. Man, this one might be my favorite. And it's being reissued on vinyl July 26th. If you could see below my waist right now, you would notice that I am holding Timber. This is an album I love. This to me it captures, I mentioned earlier in this video, I never got a chance to see the Smiths, which is my fault based on age, I guess. I was only 12 years old when the band broke up. But if I were to go back, apart from seeing the Smiths live in a sort of a musical time machine sort of scenario, apart from seeing the Smiths live, of all the Morrissey solo tours that I missed before I sort of became a fan in 1994, the one tour that I would most be drawn to go see would be the You Arsenal tour. For one thing, Your Arsenal is one of the greatest albums ever made. I think every Morrissey fan agrees on that. But seeing this tour with this set list, sign me up every day. I cannot wait for this to be reissued on vinyl. I've never had it on vinyl. I don't even know if it's ever been on vinyl. I need to look that up. There has also been some sort of hints that Morrissey may be doing a couple special shows in honor of the re-release of Beethoven Was Deaf. If Morrissey did shows with this set list right now, I don't care where it is. I'm flying there. I'll be there. You can count on that. This set list, are you serious? I'm there. So let's just hope. But anyway, it's coming out on vinyl July 26th. I'm extremely excited about that. One last big thing to touch on recently, as far as the last month or so since I've been absent from doing the Morrissey Monday videos. Big news coming out from Johnny Marr that he is coming to the United States this sort of summer and fall, and he is doing a co-headlining tour with the band James, a band that I am a huge fan of, and I have been really ever since I first saw their song Laid on MTV back in the early 1990s. And I realize that's a very generic sort of jump-in point for a band like James, but that's just how I first discovered them. I have been a huge fan of theirs ever since. I actually did see the band live one time. They are great live, but I am so extremely excited to go see Johnny Marr. I'm actually going to the show out in San Francisco at the Warfield on July 23rd, back in my home turf. It's my wife and I take a couple trips annually back home to California. I try to at least do 2 a year when possible. And it just all sort of worked out. Perfect timing. So that Johnny Marr will be in San Francisco at the Warfield on July 23rd. That was also the first place that I ever saw Morrissey in 1997. Serendipitous, don't you think? But I've been feeling a little bit homesick for California lately. I tend to, every 6 months or so, I kind of get this itch, not necessarily to move back to California, But I definitely get an itch to go back and see my father and my best friend and my family. And going back to see Johnny Marr at the Warfield is a damn fine excuse, at least in my opinion. Also, I'm not really the hugest sports guy. I don't consider myself really to be a huge sports guy, but I have been, for most of my life, when it comes to sports, I have been a huge Oakland A's fan. And sadly, this is the team's last year in Oakland. They are relocating after a multiple decade-long fight with the city of Oakland and the county of Alameda. Both sides have sort of thrown their hands up and decided that this marriage is no longer working and that divorce is the only solution, and sometimes that is the only solution for a bad marriage, is divorce, sadly. But the Oakland A's are moving to eventually Las Vegas, which is pretty disgusting if you ask me, but they're going to be spending the next 2, at least, possibly 3 years playing out in Sacramento. So, along with going to see Johnny Marr in San Francisco at the Warfield on July 23rd, the next day, I will be going to my last ever Oakland A's home game as they play their final home series at the wonderfully beautiful, majestic, glorious Oakland Coliseum. If you've never been to the Oakland Coliseum, you should consider yourself fortunate. But it's going to be an excellent couple of days of entertainment, at least as far as I'm concerned, seeing the greatest guitar player of all time and seeing my last ever Oakland A's home game. Now, I'm not really the hugest sports fan, and, especially when it comes to, like, the money and the narcissism and all the kind of ugliness that goes with it. But it is sort of an emotional thing, man. The A's are leaving Oakland. Who would have ever thought that would be the case? I'm still sort of up in the air if I'm going to continue to sort of, from a distance, sort of support the Oakland A's. I'm really, like, torn. I can't imagine not being an A's fan when it comes to baseball. I've sort of just come to the general conclusion that as long as they keep the name and the colors and the uniforms and everything the status quo as it is, apart from changing cities, I'll probably just take it up the butt and stay a fan. I can't imagine not being an A's fan when it comes to baseball. I'm not the biggest sports guy in the world, in case you hadn't noticed. But anyway, Johnny Marr's coming to San Francisco on July 23rd at the Warfield. Already got my tickets. I am all a tingle for that one. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check back most weeks for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Once again, happy 65th birthday to Mr. Stephen Patrick Morrissey, who is now officially retirement age. That definitely makes me feel like I am no longer a spring chicken. Anyway, until next time, my friends, I'll talk to you then.